airtime while Facebook Live alerts everybody that we're here. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Ruth. Glad to have you both here with us.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello out there. For people who are joining us, and I always fill the airtime so that nobody misses the great conversation that happens. If they miss what I talk about, not so bad. So just a little quick thing about Warwick's. If you are joining us from somewhere outside of San Diego, we hope that if you are in San Diego that you already know about Warwick's and who Warwick's is. But for those of you that are joining us from outside the area, we are located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. And Nancy Warwick, for people who don't know, Nancy Warwick is the 4th generation owner of Warwick's. And so while we're not the oldest bookstore in the country, we're the oldest continuously family-owned bookstore. So quite a legacy here in San Diego. We're known for, just the shop itself is fantastic. So if you're in the area, we are open, masks, social distancing, keeping everybody safe. Great book department, great other side of the store with gifts and jewelry and fine pens and all kinds of fun things. But we're also known for bringing wonderful authors to the community. So while we can't do it in person, we're bringing you wonderful authors and books and chats virtually for you. So for today's event, I will be putting both Ruth and Sarah's books into the chat so you can easily click on those, order them. We will ship them to you. If you are in the area and you want to come by the store, pick it up, you can do that as well. And there's also a way for you to participate today. Sarah and Ruth are going to talk for about 30, 35-ish minutes. And then I'll come back on screen and bring in any questions or comments that you have from Facebook. So if you are out there and you have a question, go ahead and put it into the comment section. I won't be bringing those in live, though. I'll bring those in after they're done talking. So I think I've given Facebook enough time to let everybody know that we're here. So I'm going to do a quick intro and then we'll start the show. So Ruth Druart, did I say that correctly?
Very good. You did.
We did a little practice in the green.
Say it better than I do.
She grew up on the Isle of Wight, leaving at 18 to study psychology. In 1993, she moved to Paris, the city that inspired her to write While Paris Slept, that we'll be talking about today. There, she pursued a career in international education and raised 3 sons with her French husband. She recently left her teaching position so she can write full-time while running her writing group in Paris. And joining her today is Sarah Z. Sleeper. Sarah is an ex-journalist with an MFA in creative writing. Her debut, Gaijin, did I say that right?
Yes.
2 for 2 today. I'm on a roll. That came out in 2020. We had a wonderful event with Sarah. We think it's like last, either late summer, early fall, somewhere around there. You can go back to our Facebook page and watch that interview too. That was fantastic. In the recent past, she was an editor at New Rivers Press and editor-in-chief of the literary journal Mason's Road. She completed her MFA at Fairfield University in 2012. Prior to that, she had a 25-year career as a business writer and technology reporter and won 3 journalism awards and a fellowship at the National Press Foundation. With that, ladies, have a wonderful conversation. We'll see you in about a half hour.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Hi, Ruth.
Hello, Sarah.
So great to talk to you across the pond.
Yes, yes. We're in the dark and you're in the morning.
I know. I'm in the light. So I loved the novel. I read it voraciously. It touched me deeply. It's a very poignant and beautiful, I call it a World War II novel. And this is the cover for anyone who hasn't seen it, While Paris Slept. And so, Ruth is an expat because she's from England and now she lives in France. So I would love it if she would talk a little bit about your life in Paris, what you have done there over these many years that you've lived there, and how this led you into the writing world. I know you were a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Well, I'm not an expat anymore. I've become French.
Very good.
I've got French nationality now since Brexit. I decided that would be better. Okay. And yes, I arrived in 1993, newly married and speaking no French. So there was a bit of a culture shock there for me. And that helped helped me in my book, actually, because one of the characters in the book has huge culture shock when he comes to Paris. And so I relived some of the things that I found strange when I arrived. I put them into his head. And when I arrived in Paris, actually, in my early 20s, I didn't know anything about World War II. It wasn't on the curriculum at school, and we hadn't learned about it. And when I got to Paris, I saw plaques up for people that on walls, plaques for members of the resistance that had been shot at these places, and then on buildings for Jewish families who had been taken away, often never to come back. Mm-hmm. And I started to think about this. I started to think about, wow, this happened here about 50 years ago. This was back in 1993. Mm-hmm. Only 50 years ago. Is that possible that it happened here to people just like us? How did it happen? How did these people in Paris, how did they live with the enemy for 4 or 5 years? Right. And I started how different people might have reacted to the occupation. And at that time, I hadn't even thought of writing a book. It just interested me. So I started reading up on World War II. I started reading novels and nonfiction, just becoming really fascinated by the subject. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't until about 6, 7 years later that story came to mind. And the story was about people, characters. And then I thought the best place to set this story would be occupation of Paris, World War II. And it all came together.
Right. So the book is a fascinating look inside Paris during the Nazi occupation. And without giving too much of the plot away, could you give a little synopsis of the story for those people who haven't had the chance yet to read it?
Okay, quick synopsis. Well, it starts in Santa Cruz in 1953 with a happy family are having breakfast, and their breakfast is interrupted and the father's taken away for questioning. And it's discovered, the reader will discover that he is actually French and he was in Paris during the occupation. And the story is about what he did at that time. And so it shifts from 53 to 44 as you find out what happened to him. And there are two couples involved. What happened to a French couple in Paris during the war, and what happened to this other French couple who came to America towards the end of the war. They escaped to America.
Right. And so when I read the book, one of the things that was most interesting to me was the narrative design, because you actually tell the story from 5 different points of view. And four, excuse me, okay, 4.
There are 5 characters, but there are 4 points of view.
5 and 4 points of view. So in different chapters, the story is told from different points of view. So that's a really interesting way to tell this very poignant and complicated story. Can you tell the people a little bit about how you decided on that particular structure?
Yes, I can, because when I started learning how to write, there was a lot about point of view. Whose perspective are you telling the story from? And I worked at this and I thought, well, the simplest way to do it is to tell each chapter from one point of view. Then you're in that person's head for the whole chapter. You're not switching around, which is very difficult to do authentically. So each chapter is dedicated to a character. And also I think that helps the reader to really get into the head of each character. And I really wanted the reader to be in these 4 heads in particular, to see the dilemma from the different perspectives, and to empathize really with each character.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that in the novel, I won't be giving anything away by telling people that you portray different ways that Parisians reacted to the occupation, right? So some people were active resistors, some people were collaborators, some people just sort of hid and tried to, not be noticed. And I found that, so realistic, because who knows what we would all do faced with the occupation of a brutal regime. Tell me how you were able to portray that so accurately. Did you have to do a lot of research, or you had already sort of learned a lot just by living there for so many years? Or how were you able to show these different ways of approaching the occupation?
I think that's where I used my imagination, and I imagined what it would have been like to have been there during that time. And of course, it is very different to look back on that time from where I am now in a place of safety and think that I would have done this or that. But I think there was so much fear at that time that people did things that went against their conscience because they were terrified for their families, terrified for themselves. And I try to imagine, I think most people were probably driven a lot by fear, and it would have taken those true heroes like Jean Moulin with such a strong sense of conscience, which was stronger than his own fear, to actually risk his life to do something against the regime at that time. And right. I totally admire, respect those people, because who knows what we would have done, I might have done. It's impossible to say.
So when you are in modern day Paris, how aware do you think the people are around you? I suppose it differs according to their age group, about what they remember or what they know about that time when the Nazis occupied France. Do you think they are aware, or has history kind of been lost a little bit?
Because it happened in France, I think people are a lot more aware of it than they are, for example, in the UK. So when I arrived here, it was, like I said, it was only 50 years since it was over. So we met people when we were visiting apartments to live in, people would talk about it.
Right.
It was very current. It was there. And of course, it's, as we've moved on 25 years or so, these people are leaving, dying, and their stories are still there, but they will be diluted with time.
Right, right.
But I would say it still is very present in the culture. And for example, my son, my middle son actually, his school did what they call a train de la mémoire, and they take a train from Paris, a slow train from Paris to Auschwitz. They take the students there when they're 16, 17, 18 years old.
Okay.
They take them there, and I know he was very moved by that.
Of course.
So it is there. It's in their education, I think.
Right. And so we talked about this before when we just had our own personal discussion about the fact that it took you quite a long time to write this book. And I think it's amazing. It gives writers and others hope too, that when they have something near and dear to their heart that they want to accomplish creatively, that they should stick with it. So you told me it took about 18 years, give or take.
A week or two, yeah.
A week or two. And I know you had children during that time, and you were a full-time teacher, so you were very, very busy. But could you talk a little bit about the process that took that length of time? Was it research? Was it learning to write better? What was the process for you?
The process was learning to write. I had a story. I was dying to tell this story. I knew I had a good story. I knew that, and I never lost faith in the story, but learning to write was a very steep learning curve. I had no idea how to start. And actually, there's a funny story, because I started writing it, and I was super enthusiastic, and I showed it to a good friend of mine, and she read it, and she said, "I don't think this is how you write a book."
Oh, that.
And she was very sweet about it, but she was absolutely right. It was, I was just telling everything, just chucking it out onto the page. I had no idea. So I thought, okay, I took a step back. And then actually I went on a couple of writing retreats in Devon in the UK, a short 5-day writing retreats. They helped me a lot. And I joined writing groups here in Paris. I went to one at Shakespeare and Company on a Saturday afternoon.
Best bookstore other than Warwick's, second best bookstore.
I love it up there, and they've got such a beautiful room upstairs, an old room overlooking Notre Dame. And sometimes there would be 20 people there sitting on the floor and just wherever they could find perch. And we would read to a group of strangers. And sometimes the feedback was encouraging, and sometimes it was really quite brutal. You see, and I could have lost faith then, or confidence, but I still had this story I really wanted to tell, so I kept going, and I find the writing groups in Paris really supportive. I couldn't have done it. I think I couldn't have done it without the support of the writing groups, actually. And the most recent one I joined recently, I say recently, it was about probably 7 years ago.
Right.
Was the right group for me. And I learned a lot through this group, and we're still together.
Right. I can relate, because I've had the same writers group here for maybe a decade, and it's definitely critical to get honest feedback, not just someone who tells you that, oh, that's great, so I understand what you're saying about that. And I don't know,
Yes.
I think people would be interested to know too, that let's say after you took all the time, you did all the research, you now have the best writing skills, so you're showing the story, not telling the story, but showing the story. Then you still have to convince a publisher or an agent or both, to take you on. And clearly, with your book being printed in multiple countries and multiple languages, you've done that. So how was that process for you when you had to, find the agent and the publisher?
Well, I just followed the protocol. So I looked up on internet, I went through them alphabetically, actually. I looked up the agents, and then I did carefully check each agency and each agent within the agency to see which one to send my manuscript to. And then I got to see Curtis Brown, and I looked at the profiles, and I got to Sheila Crowley, and she said she was looking for books that moved her, that made her cry. And every time I read the prologue to the book I wrote, it made me cry. So I thought, I've got something here. This might make her cry. And I sent it off, and her assistant Abby Greaves got back to me and said they'd like to see the whole manuscript, and it was ready. So I sent that off, and then they said, well, we'd like to meet you. So I was on the next Eurostar to London.
What a wonderful story, and such hope for anyone who's struggling in a creative endeavor, to not give up and to intelligently pursue the right person to connect with to get to the finish line.
I think that helps. I think it's important to write a personal query letter to the agent you have chosen.
Right.
Because ultimately, if they do take you on, you will be working a lot with this person.
So you got to like each other.
Like one.
So let's go back to I think it's, the story of how you got there is amazing and very inspirational. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the contents and ideas in the book. So first of all, the title. We want to avoid spoilers, of course, but I was reading it and I wondered about the title, While Paris Slept. Can you tell me what that title means and what it means to you and how you decided on it?
Yes, well, first of all, it took 18 years to write the book. It took a whole year to get the title.
Is that all?
It wasn't called that when I originally, it was called The Intolerance of Time.
Okay.
And then
that's interesting. What did that mean exactly?
The intolerance of time, how time moved forwards, and with time you can lose what was yours, what was once yours.
Okay. And then While Paris Slept is in meaning to you with...
I'll tell you how we got to that title. We were brainstorming all kinds of titles for a whole year. Like I said, the team at Headline were brainstorming. I was brainstorming with Cherise Hobbs, who is my editor there, who is my editor. And we just couldn't find the right title. And then Cherise had started working on the blurb, and she sent me some blurb. And it was while Paris was sleeping, and then the thing that happens. And I thought, that's the title, she's got it, While Paris Slept, because the main event of the story happens at 5 o'clock in the morning when most of Paris was probably asleep.
Right, okay. So also it's interesting, I think we talked about this the other day, the cover itself is really so melancholy and emotional and also uplifting at the same time. Did you have a hand in deciding on the cover design?
Yes, that was great. We worked on that together. First thing they went off and presented me with a design. And then I said, well, no, I would rather have this on the cover. And they went away and they produced what I'd asked for, really, which was a man on the front holding the baby. Mm-hmm. And they worked, obviously I'm not artistic like that. They did the lighting and the colours, which are the dark blue and that lovely green, which seems to show hope on the horizon.
Right.
I love. It's a beautiful cover, yes.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's a different cover in different countries, is that correct?
Yes, here's the UK cover.
Let's see. Oh, that is different. Interesting. Wow.
The shape of an eye, I think, to draw you into it.
I see that.
Spain, though, but this time it's the woman on the platform.
Yes. Wow.
Without the baby.
Without the baby. So that's let's talk a little about some of the overarching themes. It's one thing about the story of suspense and conflict during occupation in World War II, but there's a deeper story about displacement and alienation that we talked about the other day. And you have a master's in international education, and you studied something called a third culture kid.
That's right, yes.
And so people who read the book would probably be interested to know how that concept plays into this story, and the idea of sort of a displaced person or a displaced child. How are those concepts encapsulated in this book?
Well, for my master's, yes, I studied third culture kids and a sense of belonging. So a third culture kid is a child that's grown up with more than one culture. Oh, Chris, it's gone. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
I can't see you. I can't see. Can you see me?
Yes.
That's
I can
strange.
see you and I can hear you.
Okay, well, I'll just keep going then. I can't see me. Never mind. Can't see anything.
Oh, shoot. You look the same. Except for now there's a man in the corner.
Thank you. Isn't that terrible? We'll have to call a man to fix the computer.
We need tech support sometimes. It's just the way it is.
So thank you. Yeah. So yes, my master's was about third culture. Yes, a third culture kid, I was saying, is a child that's grown up with more than one culture and develops a third culture that he or she has in common with other children that have grown up with more than one culture. They have a connection they make through this third culture. Mm-hmm. And my research is into where their sense of belonging comes from if they've moved around in different countries, and maybe they've got parents, one Italian, one French, for example, living in Japan. Where does their sense of belonging come from? And this has fascinated me since I had my own children mm-hmm. in France, so a culture that wasn't my own. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's difficult for these children to find their sense of belonging. And well, this is what happens to Sam. His sense of belonging is completely thrown into jeopardy. But having said that, when I did my studies and into third culture kids and their sense of belonging, it was very positive, and they do develop a sense of belonging, but not necessarily to one country.
Okay, so the character Sam is a person that has to embrace multiple cultures for various reasons. And so in the book, you're basically showing how well or not well someone behaves as a displaced person.
Exactly, yes. Especially in the book, he's only 9 years old, so he has such a strong sense of belonging to the country that he's grown up in, that when he's put into another country, it's extremely difficult for him.
Right. And some of those passages people will find are just heart-wrenching to see this child struggling within a culture that he's unfamiliar. It was very poignant and beautiful to read. So I appreciated that a lot. And do you feel like, again, we always say without spoilers, you don't want to give away.
It's difficult, isn't it?
Like if we had to talk about sort of an emotional thesis of being a displaced child, what would you say that is? Like what can a person learn from observing the travails of a displaced person?
Oh, from the perspective of the displaced person.
Well, so if we're reading and we're learning something emotionally true about that displaced person, what would you say that is? It's kind of a hard question, but.
I think what you would learn, I suppose, is just how hard it is and how tolerant you have to be towards people that have come from somewhere else, the struggles that they are going through that you might not see.
Right.
When you arrive, as I did, actually, I think I had a bit of culture shock when I arrived in France, because I just thought it would be a different language, not a whole new culture.
Right.
And I think we talked about this before, and someone has described culture as like an iceberg, and you see the tip of it, which is what people wear, what they eat, the kinds of things they say, but underneath there's a whole great boulder of ice that you will discover the longer you are there. And you'll be chipping away at this ice until you really assimilate it and understand it. And I felt it wasn't until I could speak French that I felt happy in France. That took a while because of all these differences I kept coming across. And I had to. And so what do you learn from that? I think myself, I learned to be more tolerant towards others who might be experiencing alienation, or just feeling like they don't fit in, because it is difficult to move into another culture.
Right. Well, we talked about this too, because I have a daughter from another country as well. So yeah. She came here, and so she has her country of origin, and then here, and then her third culture that she creates with the others who she meets who are also in that situation. It's a fascinating thing to watch. And it was a fascinating thing to read about, to see how Sam, fought against assimilation at first.
Yes.
Like, I'm not doing this, that.
And I've seen children do that in the international school where I teach. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's not always easy, no.
So this novel is so full of emotion, and so, people won't get through it without shedding tears on a number of occasions. And of course, you don't write a book to make an emotional point necessarily, but if you had to say, like, what emotion would you want someone to take away? Would it be hopefulness? Would it be resilience? Would it be flexibility? What would you say?
I would say hopefulness, definitely hopefulness to, and not to cling on to things that you want. Sometimes it's better to let go and let these things come back to you. That old saying, what is it? If you love somebody,
something, let it go. Yeah.
let it go. If it doesn't come back, it was never yours. If it does, it was.
No, that's a beautiful point. It's a beautiful point. Okay, so I want to ask you this question because I know people always want to know. Now that you've only spent 20 years writing this novel, are you working on another novel now, or have you moved into another book?
Yes, I've started another book because I did have a 2-book deal actually. So there was another book.
Book deal. Wow.
Yes. So that's wonderful. And the second book is also set in Paris during the occupation, but it's a totally different story. This one is about a German in Paris during the occupation who meets a French woman who is very much against the Germans in Paris. So they have a lot of obstacles to overcome. And like While Paris Slept, actually, it's half what happens during that time, how they get together, but the other half of the book is what happens after the war, because terrible things happened after the war too.
Time of reckoning, I would assume.
There was the time of reckoning, the revenge that was taken shortly after the war by the French, on the French, was especially the women who had slept with Germans. They were, very badly treated.
Well, and we didn't mention this, but in While Paris Slept, the main characters are all French, for the most part. They're French perspectives that we see.
They are.
So now you're writing from the perspective of a German person. How hard was that to do, or was that a natural empathetic stretch for you?
That was a bit hard actually, and I read the Diary of a German in Paris, the Diary of a German soldier in Paris, and I read a book called Defying Hitler, which is a really interesting book about somebody who grew up in Germany during that time. And I really tried to put myself into the head of somebody. I wanted to put myself into the head of an ordinary man, not a particular hero, but somebody that had been indoctrinated and was just going with the flow because he didn't know how to do otherwise. He couldn't see a way out. So he's struggling, this German in Paris is really struggling with his conscience. You use your imagination as a writer to get into other people's heads. So I did my best to get into his head.
Well, and how meaningful to explore the mind of a German during that time, because it's so simple for people to just write off the entire country at that time, of being a certain mind. But of course, individuals were not all of the same mind, whether or not they were German.
A lot of them were just young. They were just boys, really.
Right.
Being told to do this and do that, and if you don't, you'll get shot. So I suppose they didn't think they had much choice.
Right. And so the power of the novelist is empathy, to put yourself in someone else's mind.
Exactly. You really have to get, and I think that's what takes time actually, is to really get into the character's head, to see things through their eyes. It doesn't always come immediately, as I've discovered with book 2 especially, actually.
So what are you going to do now that they've given you a deadline that is a little bit shorter than 18 years? They've given you what, a year? Something like that?
A bit more than a year. Yes. Well, I've been I've stopped teaching, and my youngest son is 21 now, so I'm writing full time.
Very nice.
Which is it's very hard actually to write what I would call full time, because I can't be writing all day every day. I have to. I can't do that. So I try to write at least 2 hours a day. And 4 hours is good. Some days I've written 6 hours, but
Wow.
I don't think I've ever written more than 6 hours in a day.
That's a lot. People
Yes.
may not realize this because sometimes they have a fantasy of, I could just lock myself in a room and I write for 12 hours a day. Oh, no, that's not really possible, right, Ruth?
No, and I'm actually writing book one. A lot of the ideas came to me while I was walking to work early in the morning. I'm very good when I first wake up. My imagination's flying away. So I had an hour commute to work. And during that time, I would be thinking about my book, and I had some of my best ideas actually. While I wasn't sitting at a desk or even writing, I just had to remember them.
Did you write them down in a notepad or anything? No, just have to.
No,
Wow.
because after I got off the train, I had a good 15-minute walk, and my best ideas came then. And I was thinking of the ending actually one day walking to work, and somebody was walking towards me, and they said, "Oh, Ruth, you look so sad. What's wrong?" And I'd just been thinking about the book, you see.
Right. Thinking period, so important.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, well, there's so much more about this book that we could talk about. I guess probably we should take questions.
Yep,
Julie?
I'm on. I'm here.
Oh, there she is.
There I am. Popped on. Yeah, and Ruth, it's like, and that's the thing I think that people, even when you're writing fiction, these characters are yours. They're in your head. So the emotions are all over you, I'm sure,
Exactly. I was right. I was there. I was Sam in Paris.
Oh, that's so hard.
Yes. Yes.
Well, we have some lovely comments. Ian says hello from Devon in the UK.
Oh.
And Ramona is go ahead. Hi, Ian. And Ramona is joining us from Colorado. So we've got people from all over the place. Ed has more of a comment in who's towards the end of your conversation when you were just talking. He says, a picture that has always struck with me was of French women who had been shaved bald and paraded through the streets for having collaborated. And that's something that stuck with him.
Yeah, you don't. That's not in While Paris Slept. Actually, it will be in the second book.
Oh.
But Ruth does portray a lot of ways that people are exploited, or they respond, or are not able to respond. They get a job in a German hospital to protect themselves. This kind of thing. So it's not it wasn't someone paraded down the street, but everything else you can imagine.
Yeah. So Ian has a question, speaking of Ian.
Yeah.
So he says, we're very excited about the launch of Ruth's book here in the UK next week. The US beat us to it. Sorry, Ian. He's lucky to have read a proof copy and totally recommends it. He wonders why Ruth thinks that stories from World War II remain so compelling and why they are important to tell today. Great question.
Well, yeah, I think they're very important to keep telling. Really important, just to remind ourselves that this happened to people just like us not that long ago, so it could happen again. And we have to be on our guard against prejudice and discrimination all the time. And having said that there's a lady who survived Auschwitz who comes to our school every year to talk to the children. She was 13 when she was taken away. She's in her 80s now. And she loves coming and talking to the children and telling them. And they love listening, and every time it's very moving. I think these stories are so important to keep going.
I agree. So that we don't, and that as we are losing that generation that actually lived it, and that there's nothing more powerful than hearing from them directly.
Exactly.
But it's our job to keep that going.
Yes.
When they're gone.
Yes. It would be great if we could learn from history, wouldn't it?
Oh boy, wouldn't it though? Boy, peace would be like so. Yes. It would be all over the place if people would just learn. Let's see if I have another question. Grace is saying thanks for a great interview, and she can't wait to read the book. And then my quick question is, before we wrap it up here, I know there was a lot of years that you took in writing the book, and so there's a lot of, research and everything that you did, but is there something that stands out still that surprised you in your research? Was there one thing that you learned, or that it was just like you couldn't really imagine? That's
something that, yes, actually, I will. Yes, there was. It was because D-Day was June the 6th, 1944. And the last train for Auschwitz was in August of 1944. So they were still, even after D-Day, they were pushing them onto the trains and trying to exterminate them still.
Wow.
Even though, I mean, what made them keep going like that?
Months after.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. So that was continuing through those 2 months.
Yes.
Wow.
I say August, it might have been July, but it was long
enough that.
Yes. It was right. It was right up to Paris was liberated. They were shipping them out. They were going to the orphanages, taking the children, prisoners.
And she was telling me about a building, which was like at the train station, that is in the novel quite prominently. So it's like the way station before they get shipped to the concentration camp. And that place is still there. Well,
it was a camp. It was actually a concentration camp, well, a transit camp called Drancy. And they crammed in thousands of prisoners, Jewish prisoners, into this camp. And at that time, it was social housing that had been built, and it hadn't been finished. But that didn't bother them, so they could just cram people in onto the concrete floors and everything. And then what surprised me was that after the war, they went back to this housing and they finished it. And then it is being used. People are living in the exact same buildings that the prisoners were in. And that quite shocked me, really.
That's stunning too.
They're there now, living there.
Right.
Yes. Wow. And you can't escape the history, because there's an enormous museum right opposite, and a train. One of the trains is literally in front of the buildings, the front carriage, and with a plaque saying what happened. So,
my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. And if that's not a reminder and a, every day in your face,
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that must be hard to live with, I think.
Right. But probably good too, though, I mean, in a certain way, that it's like, you need those, like, as the stories, maybe some people need that visual representation of it.
Oh yes, no, I think it's good that the train is there and that the museum is there. I just think it might be a bit odd to live in those buildings.
Right.
Yeah, don't want to live there.
Ladies, this was a fascinating and such a moving conversation. Thank you so much for sharing this work with us. Again, the book is just released. Did it just release 2 days ago in the US? Is that?
Yeah, 23rd. Yes.
So just 2 days ago.
Yes.
While Paris Slept. It's going to be a fantastic book club book. There's so much to talk about. So all of those book clubs out there, and the UK, just next week.
Yeah, a week today.
So Sarah, thank you.
Thank you. That was my pleasure. So much fun.
Appreciate it. Ruth, thank you for your time, and best of luck.
Thank you so much.
All right. I'm going to take us off of Facebook, and I'll take us off of the recording. Good night, everybody.
Bye, you guys. See you later. Bye, Ruth.
Bye.